This video is an homage to David Feldman, author of the Imponderables series of unanswerable or difficult questions, like when did wild poodles roam the earth? What flavor of chewing gum is original? What is the McDonald's character the Grimace supposed to be? And other mind-bending questions. Here is my list of 10 imponderables I came up with myself. You are welcome to try to answer any or all of them in the comments below. Let's begin. Number 1. Do people in Alaska use refrigerators? If so, do they actually warm things up? Now, I could have looked up the answer myself. Alaska has restaurants and food production centers, so the answer is yes, they have refrigerators. But the electric fridge was not invented in a region where the temperature is lower than the thing that needs to be cooled. If it was, it would be called something else. If food needs to be kept at 45 degrees and it's below freezing outside, isn't what you need technically a heater? So I guess the question is, when someone in Alaska bundles up and goes to the store to buy a fridge, do they stop and think, why am I doing this? So let's look at what people did before there were refrigerators. If your house is warm and it's frozen outside, you store food somewhere between your living space and the outside world. If it needs to be cooler, you build pipes to bring in the outside air. The challenge wasn't to block out the cold to keep your food cold. If you have a walk-in freezer, you wouldn't keep your refrigerator inside it, or maybe you would. So if all you need is something that keeps your food at a constant temperature, what's the difference between a refrigerator and an oven? Number 2. Does driving a car faster save fuel or cost you more gas? This question has been asked before, and everyone I know says driving faster costs you more gas because it's using more fuel, forgetting that the car's momentum bringing you to your destination sooner saves fuel. If the car was standing still and you were pumping the gas, they would be right. And it's possible for a car to be moving without the engine running. So accelerating uses more fuel and also saves gas by moving faster. So the question is actually, is the extra gas you are using greater than the benefit of shortening the distance? Now, my friend raised a good point that works in favor of it costing more gas, and that is, the car is burning fuel as long as the engine is running. You can't use less fuel than if the car was idling unless you turn the engine off. The point that works in favor of it saving you gas is that technically you don't need fuel to drive, just momentum. I was actually going to make a video demonstrating motorless driving, where I coast through town for about 2 miles to the nearest garage with my engine turned off. And the biggest problem, believe it or not, was holding the camera while doing it. So looking at fuel versus momentum, you could experiment by driving downhill so that the car is moving faster than the accelerator. Or you could even drive a vehicle that is carrying an engine that is running and compare fuel consumption. But would you conclude that there are ways to make it go either way, or that it simply shows fuel and momentum are two different things? What do you think? Number 3. Are horses aware of their own poop? This could be applied to any number of animals. A horse goes wherever he is standing and then eventually walks through it. But if you let it pile up in his stall, it would become a problem. So would he be aware of it then? I guess the question is, do they literally not know it's there, or are they just culturally different from us? Birds are a good example because if you can fly, you might as well have no concept of it. But birds do remove it from their nests, like many animals who move it to an appropriate place. Another possible answer is it's wrong to judge creatures that can't speak. If you were to show your pet snake its own waist and say, "Do you see it now?" what is it supposed to do? Number 4, why don't astrologers use telescopes? Cornell University's website says astrologers use computer programs that tell them the positions of the planets, using the work of real scientists, but they do not look through telescopes or learn about stars, planets, and galaxies like astronomers do, except perhaps for fun. So, if I wanted to be mean, I could say astrologers don't use telescopes because they would learn that astrology is bunk. But there are many college graduates who give readings and also majored in one of the sciences. So, if astrologers believe human events are influenced by the stars, why doesn't that include divination by looking at the craters of the moon and other discoveries? One possible answer is, politically speaking, in the past 200 years, astrology has declined while astronomy has advanced, with the exception of very recently, where astrology has had a slight upturn while telescopic astronomy has gone down. And that's because it's being replaced by other forms of astronomy that are still being developed. But before that, the 20th century saw the mass production of telescopes, while astrology advanced only with horoscopes. So it appears that astrology has been standing still for a long time, while astronomy makes new discoveries every week. So this is why people have a hard time wrapping their brains around the possibility that if Sir Isaac Newton and others never existed, astrology might have taken the place of today's science. People would be saying things like, "What kind of car do you drive?" "Well, I drive a Taurus." "Great. Research proves that April is the best month for making cars." In other words, people are able to provide evidence for whatever they wish. So I say, why don't astrologers use telescopes to try to divine things they see in distant galaxies and the surface of other planets? Number 5. Can a hot pepper be spicy enough to burn a hole in the ground? I have long wondered, what is hotness if it never came in contact with human taste buds? Would it still exist? The concept of heat when it comes to food is called pungency, which applies to any strong flavor, not just spiciness. Wikipedia calls it an irritant or an agonist. There's nothing that describes it outside the realm of taste, except for one passage that says it also affects parts of the body with exposed membranes, such as the nasal cavity, genitals, or a wound, which tells me there is a point where the sensation of burning actually becomes burning. So if you poured pure capsaicin on the ground, would it do anything? Probably not, but there are other things that cause this sensation of heat. If someone can eat a whole ghost pepper without it fazing them, could they stand having lava in their mouth? What do you think? Moving from hot to cold, what is the world's oldest ice sculpture? If you were a kid in the 80s, you may have watched Sherlock Holmes on the show Mystery, or if you were too young for that, there was the Bloodhound Gang, which ended each episode of 321 Contact, and MathNet, which ended each episode of Square One. There's an episode of MathNet based on the Maltese falcon where someone has stolen the Maltese pigeon, an ice sculpture with a priceless sapphire in its belly. Now, in reality, nobody keeps ice sculptures. They have no value. Or do they? I assume the oldest one is in Antarctica, but ice sculptors do own walk-in freezers where they can work on and possibly display their craft. So a sculpture might be worth something to the artist. I was able to find some photos of ice sculptures indoors, but every search of the word gallery takes me outdoors, and companies that provide ice sculpting consider it a show. What do you think about this? This next one's a bit complicated. It has to do with converting time into decimal. Let's say my timesheet for today says I worked 7.03 hours. I was looking at this and thought, wait a minute, I've been robbed. The .03 suggests an hour is a unit of 100, not a unit of 60. The .03 isn't 3 minutes, it's 3/100ths. And I realized what people are doing is only converting the extra minutes, not the hours themselves. So 7.03 hours is a misnomer. You wouldn't say 7 pounds and 3 grams. This part has been converted and this has not. An hour is a standard non-decimal unit of time. The metric unit of time is a kilosecond. So let's simplify things by making it just 7 hours even. Did I just convert it to decimal or no? So the question is, when converting time into decimal, do the hours become units of 100 or do they remain units of 60? And in asking this, I'm making two assumptions. When converting something, it's math, so you have to convert the whole thing, including the whole numbers. And in the decimal system, everything has to be divisible by 10. I'm curious to know what the answer might be. Number 8. This next one is a bit dated. I first posted it online about 15 years ago when dial-up internet still existed. The question is, can you prevent your internet from disconnecting by installing a hardline? A solid wire that goes from your computer outside the house to the source with no circuit breakers, in the same way that people steal cable by splicing the line. Now, I don't want to promote stealing, so let's say this is just to improve the internet connection you're already paying for. I got an answer, and that is there is a digital handshake that takes place at the internet provider regardless of the physical connection. So, adapting for the present day, was there ever a time when you could do this, and perhaps still could do it, to get a better signal than your Wi-Fi? Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe the digital handshake that takes place when your connection is approved only happens at a physical circuit breaker that opens and closes the connection. This is a hotspot or jetpack where wireless internet comes from. If you were to take this apart and look inside, it's mostly a governor that turns your internet off in case you don't pay, or in my case, once a day to make you go to the company website and sign in again after you've been reminded of the brand. If this was just a device for giving out free internet, it would be a lot smaller, like the one that fits in a cell phone. So what if you removed the governing device from this? Or maybe I just don't know what I'm talking about. Number 9, is athlete's foot a psychoactive fungus? I don't mean by eating it, I mean through the skin. You know what a psychoactive fungus is. It makes you hallucinate, sometimes something worse than that. Well, athlete's foot is a fungus, but it's a microfungus that doesn't have to reproduce using spores. It just spreads like any other skin condition, and the microbes can live in a pair of shoes for years or even decades. When I get athlete's foot, even for just one day, and I'm rubbing my feet, there's a sensation I don't get from rubbing them when there isn't athlete's foot. It feels like if your skin absorbed enough alcoholic hand sanitizer to intoxicate that part of your body. And one time I saw stars after rubbing them for just a few seconds. Last but not least, this one's a bit complicated and has to do with DNA. Imagine a fictional super spy like the Saint who changes his appearance wherever he goes, has been updated to the 21st century where even his genetic identity is fake. When he gives a sample, it comes up as someone else's. Until a technician says, "I've been studying this and this guy's DNA is incomplete." And they say, "Well, it must be a mistake. No one's DNA is incomplete, or how could he be walking?" And then they realize in a lab, DNA samples are just numbers on a screen. So what if what they're looking at is not real? Now, a long-standing metaphor for DNA is it's the blueprints of organic life. But when you redraw blueprints, the building doesn't collapse. It's just a drawing. Another one is DNA is our programming, in which case a person can write programming without it shutting down the computer they're using. So the question is, when you alter someone's DNA, does it change them, or is it just data? Or if DNA is keeping you alive and it's also just expendable code, which DNA is keeping you going and which is expendable? So one possible answer is no chromosomes that have ever been under a microscope belong to their owner anymore. It's just a sample, and therefore you can't change the genetics of a living being because you have to extract it to be able to see it. There was a suggestion that obesity is now degrading human DNA, which I don't understand because a person can lose a finger and that DNA is still good. You don't need a whole organism to clone someone. Theoretically, you could even clone them from a fat cell, and the genetic information for the human brain would still be there. Or am I mistaken about that? Thank you for putting on your thinking caps for this intellectual challenge. I'm curious to hear your thoughts. Thank you for listening.